Slave. "Row, you bastards, row!" yelled the master from the top of the ship. He held a whip in his hand, and his face was marked with fury. The slaves rowed in unison, grunting "Humph!" every stroke of the paddles. A warrior was among them. Some warriors, actually. Former warriors, but one warrior in particular, whose name would be Clovis. Clovis Dalibor. He was a slave now, of course, but he had held many titles and lands before his time here. Rowing, he knew that they were sailing to Hilda, the land of the mother, his father's land. It would be there that he would make his escape after one long year of cursed chains and back-breaking labor. Or perhaps not, he worried. Perhaps this was to be his fate until he collapsed or angered one of the masters enough to kill him, which he often thought of doing when he wasn't too weak and tired from hunger and work to think. Still, the thought of escape overrode his feelings of ache and tire, at least for now, and he rowed harder than any of the rest of the slaves without end. He began to yell, "Row! Row! Row!" The other slaves joined in and began to yell as well, singing, "Row! Row! Row!" When they were not too broken from their labors or fighting one another for the little food the masters did provide, the men did look up to Clovis for guidance and comfort. He was a strong man, a leader of men, and he had been for almost all of his life. Until now, but he was determined to see himself regain his lands and titles, and more than anything he craved the blood of the masters. One in particular, Einar, the man now screaming at the men. He was the headmaster, and he was the one who was so cruelly belittled Clovis every day of his enslavement. Clovis expected that Einar would soon come down to berate him and beat him. Clovis had been beaten and whipped many times, and many times he had decided to give up, but he never had. Not truly. He always got back up, or if he couldn't stand, he lifted his head and glared at Einar, or if he could not glare, he would think in his mind of the day that he would end him. He would not be broken, and he would kill the damned devil of a man. For many hours they rowed, but Clovis knew that they were nearing Hilda. It had been many days, but he could almost feel it. He couldn't explain it, and he was ready. He was perhaps not strong enough to fight, though he would try if need be, but he knew that he could run when the time was right. He would look for opportunities, as he always did, and pray that he might find one suitable to his condition. And he would find one suitable. If he could not find an opportunity, he would attempt to be sold to the masters in Brooks. That way he would have more chances to escape to his father's castle, and he would find it. By God, he would find it. By the end of it, the trip, the masters had docked the boat on a pier on some beach that Clovis did not recognize. That was no surprise. His father's lands were many, but he knew that this portion of the land was of his father. It only made sense, given that the masters himself and the rest of the slaves had crossed the yearling sea at its shortest crossing, traversing from other land to the motherland, to Hilda, and the province of his father, Brooks. And Clovis knew that this was Brooks, because it was beautiful and plentiful, green, and obviously belonging to his father, the Lord Westmaster, and because it had to be. And in Clovis' mind, that was that. Einar yelled something to the slaves as they walked from the gangplank of the boat and onto the dock, but Clovis did not hear it. He did not want to hear it, and he was focused now. He would be for the duration of his stay here, which he planned to be for a long time. It was stupid of the master Einar to choose to trade slaves here in Brooks. It was strictly forbidden to hold slaves here, and whoever it was who was buying the slaves that Einar would sell would have his head cut off for what he was doing, should he be caught. Clovis would make sure that he would be. Killing Einar would be just the tip of the iceberg of his vengeance upon the slave trade. He would abolish it if he could, or he would try. "Move, you idiot," said one of the masters, shoving Clovis forward, who was only a man beneath Einar, a lowly man by Clovis' estimations, but they were all lower than him. Clovis took a moment to stare at the man. His name was Gorger, a big fat man, who winced at the sight of Clovis' glare. Clovis did not grin at this, but turned his head and began to walk forward. Gorger kicked him swiftly in the back, knocking him forward. Clovis stood, ignored the blow, and kept walking forward. This was the sort of treatment he'd grown used to, and everything but the whip no longer bothered him so much. The slaves were chained to one another by the ankle, but only one ankle, the chain of which could be broken with an axe or a sword. Clovis knew that he would have to get a hold of one, and at the right time. It was new territory, and no new habits for this new territory had been formed by the masters and their various servants or underlings. Perhaps they would make a mistake, and if they did, well, Clovis was waiting. Clovis had a friend amongst the slaves, Lucas. He was a thin man now, but so were they all, and the masters had held on to him for a longer time than they had Clovis. Lucas had told him that he had been a slave for 3 winters. It was now spring. That was longer than Clovis was willing to allow Lucas to remain a slave, especially given the newfound opportunity of Brooks. That would be his goal then, to be sold to one of the Brooks masters, whoever they were. He was one of the stronger slaves, so he supposed that his odds were good, and none of the masters knew of his position before his enslavement, so they did not value him so much. Perhaps they would ransom him if he claimed to be who he was. But he did not believe that they would believe him, and even if they did, he was not going to force his father to pay his weight in precious stone and metal simply to be robbed by these bastards. He would not see them be made rich, and he would rather remain a slave or die than lose his wealth. That was just the way that Clovis was, and he was angry, furious. An hour passed before anyone from the woods, which stood a small distance away from the beach, showed up. Clovis supposed that the rider that Einar had sent earlier had given word to the slave masters in Brooks, and they would surely gather soon. In fact, this was one of them, or someone. He was a man of wealth, but he would be, given that he likely had many slaves to do his bidding and to create his wealth. Clovis wondered how the people of Brooks did not know of this man and his treachery, or any of the rest who might show. Did they keep their mouths shut out of fear? Why did they not inform the king? It confused Clovis, but he did not dwell on it. He could not. He had to focus. The man approached on a white horse, clothed in fine clothing that almost looked like a robe, with armor beneath it and a sword at the hip. What stood out the most to Clovis was that he was wearing an eccentric purple and golden embroidered hat. That was unique, a detail worth remembering, and so Clovis noted it in his mind. As the man grew closer, the slave masters demanded that the slaves form a line facing the man on horseback. Clovis did so reluctantly, like he did most things the masters told him to do. Even after a year, he was far from perfectly obedient, and he was proud of this fortitude. The Brooks slave master would see that, and perhaps that would gain him favor with the man, or perhaps the man would seek out a more obedient slave. Clovis did not care. He would not be a slave, even though he was. "Roran," Einar called to the man on horseback. "Roran, it's good to see you again, my friend. How's your family been?" "Well, thank you." His accent was that of an upperclassman, a nobleman, and he ignored the question. He held himself in that esteem and kept a distance from Einar, who was much more brutal a man, his head shaved, long beard, his shaved head, long beard, and barbaric tattoos reflecting this truth. Roran was very much the opposite. Full head of hair, clean shaven, no tattoos, smooth, clean skin. Even his nails were clean, which was somewhat of a rarity amongst the people, slave or not. Clovis noticed these things, and regardless of his escape or not, he knew that he wanted to be sold to that man, as opposed to the man he was now serving. Surely the times would be easier, and surely his opportunity for escape would increase. He was relieved to find this man, though admittedly he did not know him, and he did not know if he had someone else to do most of the dirty work that was required of his slave master normally. He rode alone, however, and it seemed that it was he who was the sole master. Unfortunately, just a moment later, more masters arrived, 3 of them, and they seemed to be traveling together. The way Einar greeted each of them, it seemed that they would be the only ones who would arrive, and each of them looked rougher than Roran, though not as rough as Einar. Clovis noted, whatever happened, whoever he got sold to, he would have a better chance of escape, and that's all Clovis really cared about. And killing Einar, which he would do one day as well as many of Einar's men as possible, though it would likely not be this day, he surmised. He would be too tired, there were too many men to fight, and his odds would be too low of success. He would need to be patient, which was hard for Clovis, but he would be if it meant that he would take the man's damned life. The other 3 masters looked roughly the same, each wearing clothes that were more plain than Roran's brown and gray and white. They were gruff and smiling, happy from the ale they'd drunk. Clovis thought assuredly just prior to arriving to the meeting on the beach. They were happy to be here, ready to buy. Clovis would be sure to appear weaker when being presented to them, as he knew how a slave auction worked. He had been a part of one when Einar had bought him, sold to him by a man who used to be his good friend, a duke of the land, Duke Laren, another man who he would kill slowly. Einar called for the auction to begin. Clovis was towards the end of the line, and he watched as his dear friends, Lucas included, companions of his enslavement, were sold off to new owners. One day he would see Lucas again, Clovis thought to himself. One day. By the time Einar had reached him, Roran had bought no one. Einar grinned at him. "If I didn't have the debt that I do," Roran said maliciously, "I would keep you." Clovis looked at him fiercely, glaring. "I'll kill you." Einar laughed and turned to the slave masters. "How much for this bastard?" Immediately Roran raised his hand and said, 600 silver pieces. Every man there knew that 600 silver pieces was more than any of the other masters were willing to spend on one slave. Clovis wondered why he was spending so much, but Einar only seemed delighted. Great, he yelled to Roran, and then turning to Clovis and whispering said, Looks like somebody wants you. Too bad, I would have beat you senseless later on. Immediately Clovis headbutted Einar, knocking him to the ground. He then proceeded to spit on him. Einar was quick to his feet, however, and grabbed a hold of his whip from his belt. But before he could do anything, a large pouch landed at his feet with a large clunk. He's mine now, Roran said. I'd like to keep him in one piece. For now. Einar smiled up at him as Roran was still on his horse. 600. He's all yours. Roran reached into a pouch on the side of his horse and threw down a pair of shackles for Clovis' hand and feet. Put these on, he told Einar. We'll leave now. You don't want to see the rest of the... Or he told Clovis, we'll leave now. You don't want to see the rest of the stock, Einar asked, disappointed. No, said Roran, who had become very serious. Thank you for your sale. And thank you for your purchase, replied Einar, an evil grin planted on his ugly face. Once the shackles were secured, Clovis followed Roran back into the forest along a trail that led to who knows where. A rope was also secured around his neck, and Roran held on to it from his horse. When they were alone, he spoke to Clovis. What is your name? He asked. Clovis looked at him tiredly and looked away before answering. My name is Clovis. Clovis, said Roran, you speak our language well. That's because I'm from here, said Clovis strongly. You are, said Roran. This is Hilda, is it not? Asked Clovis angrily. Yes, it is, said Roran calmly. He did not seem like a terrible man. Then this is my home, said Clovis, more to himself than to Roran. Indeed it is. You know, he said, there was a son of a duke named Clovis, but he disappeared over a year ago now. You don't say, Clovis said, acting oblivious. Yes, I do, said Roran. It was the strangest thing. His father, the Duke Westmaster, sent search parties out to look for him for months. When they turned up nothing, they had to stop searching, though I don't believe that he ever actually did. Clovis nodded to himself, so his father was still searching for him. In fact, said Roran, he sent me to find you. Clovis looked up at Roran. Roran stopped writing. Yes, Roran said. You're free now, Clovis.